it's great to have Dr. Jeffrey Barrington with us to talk to us about all things cornet and trumpet. And so we'll just get going. And then I think Matthew Byrne is here to play for us a little bit, which will be a real treat. And then we'll open up for questions at the end. So start writing down your questions and be ready to go, because I know that you'll have some. You'll get to experience a little bit of the Barrington boys. I'm not sure that this was the greatest idea to put us together so the world can see. Normally I have to tell them that we're on speakerphone. We're on speakerphone for the whole world.
Earmuffs.
We'll be good to go. So Jeff, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you, how'd you get your start? Tell us about your family. And, let's hear what you got.
Yeah, well, as you would know, Andy, that I'm from a brass banding family, a musical family. I'm the youngest sibling, the baby. I think that probably puts me among the best. I've learned all the things, what not to do and what to do for my older siblings. But as the youngest, I kind of grew up around my dad playing euphonium, my older sister playing cornet, and my brother playing tuba. So it was kind of always around. It was just kind of a thing that I did. And there was always an instrument around to kind of use almost like a toy to kind of play around. And then when I first really officially got started, I was 9 years old, because that's how old you had to be at Atlanta Temple, where we were at the time, to join the beginner band. To elevate my band geekiness, my birthday fell on a Tuesday night, which was when the beginner band was. And so like that was what I wanted to do on my birthday, was to get to beginner band and get started on my cornet, which within about 20 minutes I dropped on the floor and jammed the mouthpiece in, and was terrified after that. So that was my beginning. But really, growing up in our house, as you well know, Andy, there was always music going around, specifically brass banding music. And honestly, what really made me want to play was that everyone else practiced. It was just a joyful thing that would happen. Our dad would often, probably on a daily basis, pull out his euphonium and play. And I just wanted to be part of that, just like any son would want to be with their father. So it was just kind of, something that was always part of our life.
I think about that, and I'm sure you do now as a father of four. We're both fathers of four. I'm not sure how that, we know how it happened, but I don't remember Dad ever making us play. I don't think that was in his toolkit. There was never a mandate that we practice. Was that the same case for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something I've tried to carry on in my own household. Because sometimes as a kid, you would know when you're forced to do something, when it's expected of you. At least we Barrington children all have a natural rebellious streak, and I'm sure you do too. So by that, I probably would have resisted more. But like I said, it was something that that Dad just practiced. He would just play along. And as an officer, often he was in places where he didn't have a particularly good band to play in at the time. And so what he would do is get whatever latest ISB record, or at the time then it would be cassette tapes and then CDs, and then write to Dr. Holtz and get all the euphonium music for that album, and kind of keep a list. So he would just play along with the CD. So that was something that I looked forward to, just taking part in that. But yeah, absolutely. Once I started taking it more seriously, even at that point, Dad never made us practice, never made me, practice. And he really kind of left me alone. The only time that he would come down and maybe make a suggestion is if I were playing a melody and I was phrasing it wrong. Yeah. If I was breathing in the wrong place or doing something like that, that's when he would just come down and say, you might want to check that out a little bit and not breathe in that spot. And then he would kind of back out of it. But as far as that,
because with me, I guess he learned with me.
younger siblings, right?
He would not. That's right. He would not make me practice, but he certainly demanded excellence from me. would not let me get away with too much as far as just bad rhythms or and like you said, phrasing with melodies and things like that. He just would say, if you're going to play it, you need to play it right. And so that was, but you're right. I mean, there was not a whole lot of just heavy hand, but it would show up every once in a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And then the duet books, Amson's duet books or the Arbin duet books, you know, it's still, you know, a love of mine to play those from that. So yeah, that was kind of how things got started. It was just part of our household. And it's funny, just growing up in a brass band tradition. My wife's family, they were from the Eastern Territory, also all brass band people. They all played in the New York staff band, like we all played in the Southern Territorial band. So my son Matthew, literally everyone in his life plays a brass instrument. And I remember when he was in kindergarten, may have been even preschool, we had like a friend of his had like a play date or something like that, and they were in the back seat. There's nothing better than a toddler conversation. And Matthew, just trying to make small talk, said, "Oh, so you know, what instrument does your dad play?" And this other girls kind of stared at him like, "Instrument? Like what instrument does your dad play?" And then finally he's like, "Oh, does he conducts?" And it's like, so anyway, it's just
When did you
around us.
who were your first influences outside of the family?
Sure.
And that would be the first part of the question. The second part of the question, when did you decide that this was going to be something that you wanted to pursue, just beyond just playing in a brass band?
Sure. I mean, you know, early influences, people that I was around when I was younger. I mean, I was privileged to grow up in Atlanta Temple at a time when there was just a lot of really great banding happening. I see Daryl Crossan's face just pop in over there. Hey, Daryl. You know, and so like I was around these guys growing up, but you know, the influences around at that time would have been like Bill Southwood, and the band, his cornet sound, his flugel sound. You know, the Southern Territorial Band was something, you know, again, as a kid, you look up to something that your dad is a part of and your older siblings. And so I always looked up to that. And so as from a cornet perspective, I can still remember that solo cornet section. Bob Goodyear, Lars Youngholm, Ian Anderson, Mike McDonald, Doug Court. So those were like the sounds that I had in my head, you know, growing up. And then when it came to like, you know, outside of like brass banding stuff and trumpet, you know, when I went to sixth grade, I'd already been playing for several years. Like a lot of Salvation's kids, we start a little bit early. And so, you know, I got in the band. It just wasn't really something I enjoyed as much at first, you know, kind of getting into it. I played this weird cornet and everybody made fun of me for not having a trumpet. I'd never held a trumpet at that point. And I didn't own a trumpet until like probably my sophomore or junior year of high school, when I got a summer job and could try to buy one. But the first time I kind of got serious about playing, when I thought, you know, this is something maybe I could do. Oddly enough, when I was younger, you know, like all kids, I thought obviously I was going to be a professional athlete. I was going to be a baseball player, and for the Atlanta Braves, and that was going to be it. And so, sports is something I really enjoyed playing, and music was something I did on the side. But when I was in seventh grade, I was cut from the junior high football team, which let me know that I probably wasn't the athlete I thought I was.
Was that
Shreveport, Louisiana. That's right. And so, you know, I was kind of upset about being cut from the team. It's funny now looking back at it. But that night, mom and dad, we were out to dinner, and dad had a flyer for the Arklatex Youth Symphony, the local like youth orchestra, that were just about to have auditions. And he just kind of pushed it across the table. And he said, "Hey, you know, why don't you audition for this and see what happens?" And so I went in on my cornet and auditioned for that and got, you know, principal trumpet cornet in that orchestra, which was a lot of fun. That was the first time I'd ever really played any of that kind of stuff. I remember playing like Saint-Saëns, the Marche Militaire, all that stuff at the end. And the local Rick Rowell, who was and still is the principal trumpeter of the Shreveport Symphony. He's a Boston guy. He took an interest in me. Like, he heard me play and said, I'd really love to give you lessons. So that was like the first like real outside of brass banding, like formal lessons that I took. And it's funny, like, I got in touch with him recently just to thank him, because I still use my Schlossberg book is still all marked up from those lessons. And I still use those to teach today. And like some of the things that I learned were really pivotal. So like those are some of my, early influences getting started. But really from that moment on, I know it's kind of early. Music was just something I knew I was going to do. That was something I was going to pursue.
Yeah. I just remembered that you were one of Mike McDonald's kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And those conservatory times with Mike McDonald and the ALM were pivotal for me. Mike had, some great things. One of the things he did that I still do, and the conservatories do too, is like every kid had to play a solo. Like that was just part of the program. You had to stand up and play a solo. And so getting up there, and I can still remember Mike would always, Major McDonald would always demonstrate, a solo on the first night. It was always like from Swan Lake. I can still play that from memory. I've never even seen the music just from watching him play it sometimes, and like the joy of that. But like Mike was just such an encourager. He was like, he would, I don't know how many in this forum here have received an Amson book from Mike McDonald, like the duet book. And, it's just, I've just been,
he still to this day carries them around.
That's right. He carries that and a CD of compilation things, his favorite things, and we'll just hand them out. And I love that. It's just like, I think of how privileged I am looking back at the encouragers that I had growing up. I took for granted at the time just because they were just around. That's just what I knew. But now I realize how influential that was. Yeah.
What a great model for DMDs today. Mike McDonald, he just quietly went about his business and influenced kids to do the right thing. You're absolutely right. That's awesome. So let's get into your college years and your varied career, your interesting career path, and how did you get to where you are now?
It's a good question. So, it's funny, like growing up, like I always knew that I was going to do music, and I always had in my head that I was going to go to Asbury College at the time. That's where my sister Stephanie went. Mom and Dad spent some time there. And it's just funny, like looking back, I never even auditioned at or considered anything else. I didn't know anything different. And often I kind of just chose to be ignorant to anything outside of Savage Army brass banding as a high school student. So I was just like, that was it for me. I didn't really care about any of the other stuff. And I remember, talking about Rick Rowell, he used to say, like, oh, we need to get you auditioning for like Tanglewood in the summer and getting up there. And I just remember going, I already have a conservatory I go to. I'm going to Mike McDonald. So like, thank you. No. And, I didn't know, I probably wouldn't change that. I love those times, but, and so Asbury was where I was going. And so, when it came time, I went there, and Ron Holtz was there. And as far as like my cornet trumpet playing, like, again, like Ron Holtz had just a major impact on my musicianship and just my understanding of Savage Army music in general, and understanding of commitment and understanding of all those kind of things, that I learned from Ron Holtz. And one thing he was really great at was like, he was kind of officially the trumpet teacher. He would teach the trumpet students, and Robert would know this too, is like, he was quick to pass off students to other people that he thought that would have a better influence. And so right away when I got there, as a freshman, I was able to study with Terry Everson, who was still in the Lexington area. He had just finished teaching at UK before moving to Boston. So I know Robert got to study with Terry as well. And again, that was just like hugely influential. This just really dynamic Christian, wonderful man who was just a musician like I'd never experienced before, and just coming from a different perspective. I remember one of the first solos I played there was a trumpet call, a Ken Downey, solo. And it was kind of sort of newish at that time. This is back in 1998 or so, to date myself. And I remember Terry going, I really like that solo. And now I hear him play that solo all over the place just as a Christian witness, and a wonderful thing. But Terry was really influential. And, I look at all my teachers, and think like all the things that I've learned from each of them that have kind of built me into, the things that I have now. And one thing for him was just like his phrasing and shaping of of things was way bigger than I had attempted before that. And he really encouraged me to kind of explore that. And then after him, he moved on. I studied with Bill Jones for a little bit, who was in the area. He was a Juilliard student from around the time that Bill Smith was at Juilliard, but he was getting his doctorate at University of Kentucky at the time. And then my senior year, Ron worked it out so I could study with Vince DiMartino, who was teaching at another college nearby. And again, just point to the kind of man Ron was. I mean, he every week gave me the keys to his car and said, drive on down to Center and take lessons from Vince. And again, it was just
Holtz family. That you want to talk about a doctoral dissertation.
Sure.
Someone should write a book on the Holtz family and the impact they've made on Salvation Army music and youth and the Salvation Army in general. Even kids who decided not to pursue music. I still think that so many people could point to that family generationally as an incredible influence. But keep going. Sorry.
Yeah. So anyway, so that was my time at Asbury, which was great. And then for my master's degree, I wanted to get a little bit more of a kind of a conservatory type feel. And I wanted to move to New York. To be honest, I wanted to be around those guys in New York staff band. Was Rick really hopping at the time? A lot of young guys in the band. It was an exciting time. It was when, Chris Ward and Derek Lance and Doug Barry and Mike Baker and those guys were younger at the time, and it was just fun. So I went to the State University of New York at Purchase Conservatory, Purchase College, and I auditioned there because I heard they had a brass band. The brass band has always drawn me in, and so Graham Ashton still is the trumpet professor there, a British trumpet player, also in the brass banding scene in England. He was one of the trumpet players in Philip Jones' brass ensemble for a number of years and on a ton of soundtracks. And what I really gained from him was he was a pretty no-nonsense teacher, which some people shy away from that. I think maybe because our dad was pretty no-nonsense. I've always appreciated people that are pretty, are not going to pull any punches because, I need that. So he was really good about calling me out on things. I always thought I was pretty good at shaping a lesson to work around the things I didn't feel like practicing. I wanted to avoid transposition. So, I could come in with I have this other thing I want to work on. So I kind of felt like I was manipulating things to my own help. But Graham, he had none of that. I remember one lesson where I came in and he made me do a Strauss tone poem that was an E on my B flat trumpet and sight read it. And you think about a B flat trumpet to an E transposition is a tritone. And I mean, he just went back to his computer and I hacked away at it for an hour. He never said a word, and then said, "All right, see you next week." And I'm like, oh, man, that was but it was just those moments of really learning, I can't shy away from the things that I'm not good at, because why, what's the point of that? And also from him, he is one of the best Baroque piccolo trumpet players I've ever heard in my life. His albums are on Spotify, just some, things you probably wouldn't find if you weren't looking for them. But really just some of the tastiest playing. And so that's the sound I have in my head when I play piccolo. But anyway, from there, I mean, Salvation Army banding and the Salvation Army music is always something that's been a part of my life. And so while I was in my master's degree, I was hired as the assistant divisional music director in New Jersey, and then was offered a full-time position when I finished grad school. So I just kind of stayed there and became the divisional music director eventually in New Jersey for a number of years. Got married, enjoyed that, loved being up in that area, playing in the New York staff band. And then, we decided to move on the opposite end of things down to Texas. We spent 6, 7 years in Texas. I was the choir music director in Arlington, which I really enjoy. That was something, as a divisional music director, sometimes you feel like you don't have as much impact at your core. Sometimes you feel like you're not as good a soldier locally because I'm, spread thin. So I really enjoy being able to focus on one core in one place and building that. But the DMD life called me back in, and I became the DMD in Texas for a few years. And then, as transitions come, as things come, I kind of took a step back and looked at some things and thought my kids were young and I wanted to pursue trumpet a little bit more and pursue like college, university teaching, something I've been interested in. And so we decided to move to Lexington, where my wife's family lives. And I just finished a doctorate in trumpet at the University of Kentucky, where I studied with Jason Doble. And Jason, I learned a lot of great things from Dr. Doble as well. His specialty is Baroque trumpet playing, but like playing the Baroque trumpet, which is something I'd never really gotten into. I'm still like a novice at that at best, so I wouldn't venture into that as much. It's like a really specialist world. My specialist world is brass band cornet playing, so that's kind of what I've stuck with. But anyway.
As I'm sitting here listening to those that have taught you and those that have influenced you, I think you think about the great impact that the Bob Goodears and Bill Southwoods and Lars Otto especially made on your life as a cornet player, and then I hadn't thought about this until just now, but the list of people that you've studied with, these master trumpet players, that are absolutely at the top of their game, that poured into you on trumpet. I think you are the perfect person to talk to us a little bit about trumpet and cornet, American trumpet playing, American cornet playing. And so that's the rocky segue into the master class. But why don't you get started with what you're here to talk to us about?
Yeah, something I've really kind of been thinking a lot about in recent years, especially as I get into brass banding, maybe outside of the Salvation Army, like some of the world of NABA and some of the American contesting bands are really taking off, which is exciting as a brass band person, because all of a sudden this thing was kind of niche as becoming more mainstream and becoming more, and there's this like thing that's been part of my life that I'm like, ooh, you're just figuring this out. This is something we can work on. So this idea of what it means to be like a cornet player in America. I think so often we associate brass banding as like a purely British thing. Like we talk about the British brass band as the model. And certainly the contesting world and the history kind of goes back to these early contests back. I'm not going to get too much in the history of it unless you really want to, but like back in the middle of the 1800s when these sax horns and John Diston and these really new, piston instruments and rotary valve instruments that look exactly like B flat and E flat like we have now, these contests. Well, really early on, John Diston, who was a member of that, traveled to America and started the movement here too. So American brass bands have been around just about as long as British brass bands. And so it's like an interesting topic of like how these things have kind of like developed. But as now in a modern era, as we're getting back into brass banding, what does it mean to be an American cornet player? And my fear is that too often trumpet players who haven't really come to cornet until playing in brass bands recently assume that they have to kind of manufacture this almost what we think of like a stereotypical sound of vibrato and other things that like have developed in other parts of the world but haven't really developed here. And so my thinking is like I think we can still take an American approach to our sound concepts on cornet without sacrificing the purity of the instrument and not trying to manufacture something that might sound to us a little bit contrived. I think of vibrato in particular as something to think about. Often I hear these really great, when I hear them on trumpet, I'm thinking like, man, that guy's awesome. And I hear on cornet and they make this big, beautiful sound, but there's this like assumed vibrato that we have to use because I'm holding this cornet now, so I have to go make this kind of attempt at making a British vibrato. And it's nothing to say against the vibrato that's developed over there, but it would be the same as me walking around trying to talk with a British accent. It might be might be offensive to someone from England. If I don't know, Nick, you could tell me that. But anyway, so like, you know, being an American cornet player, and of course the question comes all with equipment, and like there's different styles of like instruments and mouthpieces. Do I, you know, in America, a lot of the straight model cornets where they use a shepherd's crook and all these kind of things. Mouthpieces become like a really big topic of discussion. I have, you know, a collection of things here that, I talk about. And like this, you know, I just think it's really important to understand like the equipment you're playing on and everything else. I think one of the assumptions, again, when I play cornet in a brass band, I have to play on the biggest equipment I can with the biggest mouthpiece that's got the deepest cup to try to, again, manufacture this sound without having to like, you know, work towards it. And I think there's a danger there in that you're not really like digging into it. You're trying to find like an alternate path to this sound, when in reality, sound concepts are what you're listening to.
When you're teaching a trumpet player to first play cornet, what concepts do you feel like are important as far as playing a cornet as an American cornet player? What do you want to instill in your cornet players?
To me, like the difference in like cornet playing, especially if I'm teaching a student who's playing a cornet solo, there's a different level of maybe lyricism, of a singing quality that I may not focus as much on in like on the trumpet side of things, with some of the, you know, more like the Hindemith like trumpet, you know, sonata. It's just a little bit like, that's an example of something that, you know, there's lyricism there, but it's, you know, it's a different type of sound. Whereas cornet is a more like singing quality. So the first thing I would talk about is the idea of singing. So when it comes to sound concepts, unless you're listening to things, you know, you're not gonna have that concept. So first thing I would have them do is we would sit down and listen to some cornet players of all varieties, of British and American. You know, you think of, you know, the British ones that are, you know, you're thinking of Richard Marshall or Philip Cobb, David Dawes, like these kind of sounds where you hear the lyricism that comes like from that genre of playing. I mean, it's the same as like learning any genre. There's a performance practice involved there. So if I'm going to play a piccolo trumpet on a Baroque piece, I have to know what these trills mean in ornaments. Well, same thing with cornet. I have to know, you know, those kind of approaches. So first thing is like the idea of a sound concept, because the truth is, you know, I talk about cornet and trumpet and all these kind of things. Let's say Phil Smith. Phil Smith, when he plays trumpet, if he wants to, can really sweeten that up and make it sound like a cornet. And if he's playing a cornet, he could light that up and make it sound like a trumpet. I remember we were on tour in England with the New York Staff Band, and we were somewhere and they wanted to do like a masterclass with the cornet section. And we all had our trumpets with us because we were doing a trumpet ensemble piece. So we did this like kind of a blind test where we went behind a screen with the audience out front and played the same things on cornet and trumpet, just kind of from a different approach. And nobody really could tell the difference. Like there wasn't like really consistent to say, oh, that was trumpet or that was cornet. It's all listening. Terry Everson, I've mentioned him, like he's a really beautiful cornet player, but can also like really light it up on trumpet. And somebody asked him, like he came and played the Philip Spark Cornet Concerto not long ago in Lexington. And, you know, how do you make the cornet sound like that? How do you get into that headspace? And he just said, if I have a cornet thing coming up, I just listen to nothing but cornet players for a month. And then it just kind of puts me into that headspace. So really like equipment and all that kind of stuff comes down to like what makes it right and easy for you to like kind of get into that headspace, but really it has to do with what you're listening to and the concepts, which beg the question, like, okay, American cornet players, who do I listen to? Yeah. One of my favorite albums of cornet playing from an American perspective as a Salvationist you can sort of find it on CD if you want to, but there's salvoaudio.com. Look up Mark Ridenhour, By the River. It was an album he made of Salvation Army cornet solos. And it is some of like the most fantastic playing that I've heard. It's so clean and precise. Very like, you know, I would definitely say like a cornet sound, but it's kind of from that perspective. So if you're writing something down from here, look up at Salvo Audio. You can find a CD, but most younger generation, if it's not available to stream, it doesn't exist. So it is available to stream. salvoaudio.com, Mark Ridenhour, By the River.
And Mark Ridenhour is interesting. He's a perfect example of what you're talking about, because his equipment is not necessarily equipment anybody else would want to try to play.
Right. He plays.
I mean, he plays a trumpet mouthpiece on his. Am I wrong?
Right. No, you're not wrong. Like nowadays, he plays a modified Getzen Eterna cornet that's modified to accept his trumpet mouthpiece. Now, Mark is a perfect example of like what I teach as being like a thinking musician. Like there's nothing that he does that is not really, really, really well thought through. He has a reason for everything that he does. And so he's done a lot of thinking and research about like shank size, like the mouthpiece shank size, you know, and believes that like the trumpet mouthpiece being a longer allows for some different overtones. Now Mark is coming from, you know, what I would say is a soloist perspective. This is another cornet question too. What's the difference between being a cornet soloist and a cornet in a brass band section?
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Because as a soloist, and I must admit, I've been on a mouthpiece hunt for 20 years. I don't consider myself like an equipment junkie, but like I still feel like I'm trying to figure out. But I've kind of come down to, I've got like two go-to mouthpieces. The one that I use if I'm playing a solo, or if I'm kind of like sitting on the end of a band that needs to like light some things up. And I play a more like cup-shaped or a bowl-shaped cup, like a more American style, trumpet style of mouthpiece. And you can't see it here, but what I play on is it's a Bach 5A that's been modified with a big old 23 throat on a 1 1/4 rim. That's what I use. Like if I need to be able to lighten things up, I can still sweeten it up, but I can like get it in there. And then as a soloist, but when I'm sitting down in a brass band cornet section, it's much more like singing in a choir. We don't really make the connection between brass banding and choirs as much as we should, but they have much more in common than I think brass bands and orchestras and other instrumental ensembles. It's this kind of unified sound. And so then I will opt to a more like a V-shaped cup, like the Dennis Wick. Or in my case, I've been using a lot of, I live in Lexington or around Lexington. And so this is where Pickett Mouthpieces live, like Peter Pickett lives here. So I've been playing a lot on his British style and American style cornet mouthpieces. I like the rim shape of the Pickett mouthpieces, but it has that V, kind of a deeper shaped cup, which allows me to just blend a little bit easier. So when it comes to sound, we talk about like bright sound and dark. So we have these words that we use. Yeah. And really it comes down to like the overtone, like the sounds that are kind of bouncing around. So like the deeper the mouthpiece, kind of the less overtones that you hear. And so you hear more of like kind of a warmer, what we would call like a warmer, darker sound. Yeah. Whereas like a shallower cup or a bowl-shaped cup allow you to kind of get those overtones a little bit more. Not to say that I can't get different sounds on both. But when I am playing a solo, depending on the solo, I'll often prefer a more bowl-shaped cup because I can light it up a little bit differently when it gets into some range, and I have a little bit more control of like the sounds I make. Whereas on a big old like Dennis Wick mouthpiece, sometimes no matter how much air I'm putting into it, it's going to get that kind of like maybe like on a negative side, like a huffy sound, but like that might be great in a brass band section. So yeah. I kind of float between those two depending on where I'm at the circumstance.
Interesting.
But, yeah.
So that's that equipment, the minimum. Do you worry too much about the instrument as well, or are you thinking? Again, I guess it really just comes down to sound content.
Different strokes. Yeah, different strokes for different folks. You know, I think we worry too much about things. I think a dangerous idea is to say that like I want to get a big sound on cornet, so therefore I have to get the biggest and the biggest and the biggest.
Yeah.
Because I think there is a trade-off there. You're going to sacrifice on your endurance. You're going to sacrifice on your range. And unless you're playing that all the time. Now, if we're talking like some of the contesting band guys in England, they literally only play cornet. This is the instrument that they play. Where like if you're doubling back and forth, you know, you need to have a little bit more flexibility. So there's a, you know, a trade-off there. Yeah.
I agree with you. You made a statement earlier about American trumpet players how exciting it is that more and more people are getting into the brass band scene and falling in love with it. We have one here in Oklahoma City, and it is exciting to witness people picking up a cornet and then eventually going out and buying their own equipment, and more people are getting into this. And then it's a slippery slope, isn't it? Because then you really get into people chasing those sound concepts by trying to manufacture it through equipment and all of that. You're exactly right. All of that is to help you.
Right.
The easiest way to get
right.
to that sound concept. And I love also, just want to reiterate the cornet soloist versus a cornet section playing, and how different that is, and you really got to be, you know, there are going to be more section players than there are going to be soloists in this world, and so that's really great. And you're right. Even in the Salvation Army now, we're finding more and more that our young kids are having to play trumpet and cornet. I'm with you. I love it when people sound like a cornet player when they play cornet and sound like a trumpet player when they play trumpet. And so to me, this is a really important topic as we're evolving into more and more brass bands in the United States, but even in the Salvation Army, the opposite of that, more and more of our cornet players are also trumpet players. Mm-hmm. And so thank you for that. Did we want to invite Matthew in now?
Let's do it. Yeah, we don't want to run out of time. Get into the good stuff.
Hello.
Hey, Matthew.
Hey.
So you're going to play for us Colonel's concert piece, right?
Yep.
And this is a perfect piece to kind of go on our conversation. Is this a trumpet piece or a cornet piece or both? What do you think?
I'd say both. I mean, it's concert piece for cornet, but I've heard a lot of different recordings where people, I mean, will do what they think fits best. So a lot of trumpet and cornet for both.
Yeah. In fact, I think it's published as a wind band version and a brass band version. I think the wind band version says concert piece for trumpet, and I think the brass band says concert piece for cornet. So what are you going to start on us today? We'll hear you play. Enough of me talking.
Start on cornet.
Okay. Well, let's get into it. Why don't you start from the beginning, and let's go from the beginning up through the slow section.
Okay. And let me know if you need me to move or anything.
Okay.
You want me to go to the slow section?
Yeah, let's hear the slow section now. Okay. Good. I'll stop you there. Good. All right. Lovely job, Matthew. Thank you. Okay. So in a minute, I'll talk about something else in a second, kind of let your rest your chops for a second. But in a minute, I want you to go back and play that same passage again on trumpet. We're going to talk a little bit about the differences between the two. But like, let's kind of talk about the lyrical section in particular, because I think this brings up like a topic when we talk about lyricism and a singing quality, whether you're playing trumpet or cornet. I think it's just a general musicianship thing. But I think one of the difficult technical things that we have on the cornet or the trumpet or any brass instrument is this like making connection, right? Of connecting like these lines into like this singular idea. I think too often with our air, we use our air to do more than we need it to. Really, our air needs to be this steady column, right? The steady stream of air that can kind of like, you know, push over things. And then we can use our articulation to interrupt the air in different ways and different styles. But I think a danger in like especially that slow section is using our air in little like kind of like pushing, like almost using our air to articulate. And it's a really subtle thing. I mean, it sounded beautiful, but this is like a really subtle thing for me, I think. And like practicing, like almost like I would practice this like slurred for a little while and try to get it as like just silky smooth and connected right over the top as I can. So that when I add my articulation back in, that's all I'm doing is I'm just adding the articulation to already like what's there. You know, I talked earlier about how I kind of like got all these different things from different teachers swirling around in my head. But one thing Vince DiMartino used to talk about is like, you know, like this like air connection. Often we try to do like musical things to like a physical thing. So like really this is just, you know, a hunk of metal. It's just like a bunch of tubing. This is nothing. There's nothing musical about this. It's just mechanics. But sometimes like in our effort to be overly musical, we do all these like, ooh, 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 try to make it like really everything else. But that is just not how the trumpet works or the cornet works, right? This is a mechanical thing that requires this like, steady stream of air. So always remember that, like, don't do musical things to a technical thing. Like the music happens in the line and the lyricism and everything else. And just being careful to like connect those things. Also, I think like maybe some of the phrases could be bigger. This is like, there's some like really difficult pitfalls in that slow section. Yeah. When you get up to that high C, you're kind of left to hang up there, but then you've got to like come back down. Right. Yeah. So making sure you've got enough like air and, everything else to kind of push through that. So I think being careful to shape some of the sustain notes in particular, so they feel like they're going somewhere. Usually when I hit that high C, if I hit that high C, besides the joy that it like actually came out, if I'm not careful, I kind of just like hit it and huff it. And then I got nothing left. Like if you think of like maybe even a more musical approach to hit that, like dee da dee da dee, so that the listener knows you're kind of leaning into there a little bit. Okay. But yeah, I mean that's just some thoughts there on like the slow section. This just making sure that the air is like this singular thing that's like connecting everything else as smoothly as possible. Really long notes. Especially like at the ends of like phrases. I think too often we like get to an arrival point and chop it off too soon. Yeah. One thing I've noticed about, anytime I get a chance to play around like some of the really truly great trumpet cornet players, I always notice that to a person, they hold every note just a little longer than I do. Yeah. It's always like something I've taken into account when I've sit next to some of these guys. I'm like, wow, like I think I'm holding something long and it's just like, all that much longer, like to really let a note kind of like fester a little bit. So anyway, let's hear it on trumpet now. So I want you to go back and play that whole, like from the beginning up through that slow section again, but this time on a trumpet, and we'll talk about the differences between the two. Good. Now jump to the slow section. Good. All right, let's pause there for a second. Okay, so Matthew, which instrument do you prefer to play it on?
I would prefer to play this on cornet.
Okay, why?
For me, I feel like a lot of the slurring and the phrasing comes a little bit easier to me on cornet. Not the phrasing, but as far as moving through the slurs and the phrases, it comes a little bit smoother to me on my cornet.
Okay. What equipment do you play on, out of curiosity, in your cornet? What mouthpiece?
I'm playing on a Wick 4B right now. And it's, I don't know, like sometimes I have difficulty switching from trumpet because I'm playing trumpet so much at school.
Yep.
And like I try my best to play cornet still a decent amount. But switching from a 1 1/4 Bach on my trumpet to a 4B Wick it takes some time to get back into it.
Right. You find you just kind of get lost into it sometimes. Yeah, I've been there. And this might be if you like prefer playing this cornet, you might prefer, or you might experiment with some like more like bowl shaped cut mouthpieces, as opposed to kind of like I was talking a little bit earlier, like just in my experience, and there are plenty of people who would disagree with me, but like in my experience, like I can still get some of the benefits of that cornet, like you're talking about, like the slurring and the kind of the lyrical qualities of that are a little bit easier on the cornet, while still kind of lighting it up. Because like this solo is difficult because you've got this big old lyrical section, which requires all this like musicianship and all this like connection, which sometimes, admittedly, I think you're right, it can be a little bit easier to get that sound in your head on the cornet.
Yeah.
But how about those first two stinking measures of the whole piece? How does that feel on that 4B mouthpiece?
I mean, it's taken a lot because at first I was practicing it on trumpet.
Right.
Because this is for our audition at UGA, so I assumed everybody would be on trumpet, but Mr. Smith said, play it on what you want. So when I started playing it on cornet, it did feel a little bit more difficult to get the same kind of sound and intensity I wanted straight from the beginning, and make sure like I'm pushing my air and my sound through to my like whatever my destination is that I set that.
Right. Yeah, and that's something I found is like sometimes with like the deeper kind of Wick type of mouthpiece, like articulation is a challenge to get it to pop like it does on my trumpet. So like that was one big night and day difference between your trumpet and your cornet opening. Of course, that's a scary opening anyway, to come in on that and it has to just be so aggressive and bitey, to get that sound. So like, on that Wick mouthpiece to kind of like work on, and again, like you say, it's like the air going all the way through that. It's just like this rush of, but I find that I have to articulate particularly hard in order to get like the crispness that I want to come through on that cornet mouthpiece. So, I mean, I don't know when your UGA audition is. Probably too soon for you to try to experiment with different mouthpieces. But like, I remember I've played the solo on cornet and trumpet. Most recently on cornet. I've played it on trumpet. In fact, when I was in college, when I was studying with Vince, he had me play this on an E-flat trumpet. He had this 4-valved E-flat trumpet that had a C trumpet bell on it. And I did it because like he wanted me to do it on. I probably wouldn't have chosen to do that. But there's a lot of ways you kind of approach this as far as sound. The truth is, like, overall, like if I close my eyes, you have the similar approach in sound on the cornet and trumpet. Now, obviously, we're dealing with the limits of technology and microphones and everything else. So there are going to be some like differences, but it has to do with kind of like your concepts in there.
Yeah.
So it's like, interesting to kind of experiment with that. Just on like another musical note, I'm talking about like note lengths. On the technical side of things, there are a couple of passages that like can really lend towards like a longer phrasing feel. Like I think of like the all that stuff. It's really easy to kind of go back it up, and just kind of like approach that like these little right kind of feel. But I think you could benefit from like really like blowing through those eighth notes to make them much fatter. I think too often we like short notes to try to make it sound more like bright and light. And really, that's the articulation's job. I think short notes are a myth.
Yeah.
Most of the time. Unless, like, there are some really specialized type of trumpet cornet playing. Like, if you're going to play in a mariachi band, like, that's a very, like, short, stylized type of playing, like, which is incidentally really difficult to do if you've, if you've ever tried to do that, right? But in general, like, and the type of playing, like this orchestral or band type of playing, there are very few times where you need to play a really short note.
Yeah.
Always, like, in general, just like even on the aggressive side of things, because like you can make it really energetic and full of life by pushing through that. I do a lot of work on my lead pipe for that kind of stuff. I'll take my tuning slide out and work on those passages going to try to get like my articulation of my air sounding really good, so that when I add it back together. I don't know if that's something you've experimented with much on like practicing like technique through the lead pipe.
Yeah, I mean, I try to do it a decent bit. If you know Whiff Rudd, he has a book that at the beginning has a lot of lead pipe stuff. So I do kind of lead pipe.
Yep, and that's a great, like those few pages are excellent. Like when you're doing like the scale patterns, but like keeping it the same pitch. Like that's kind of like, it kind of like separates all these things. I think too often we connect these things into like one thing. We allow like bad vowels to affect our articulation, when it's like, really, it's like, oh wait, my air and my articulation are the first things happening. The vowels are coming, you know, a couple of feet down the tubing. So making sure that like those are going. So like in general, I think like I mean, you sound really good. I think just getting into some of the longer phrasing stuff on like the slower section, and then just like note length, just like keep your notes as fat as they can be, even on the other stuff you're like articulating hard. One thing I wanted to do, I know we're going to run out of time here pretty soon. I want to save some time for some questions. Can you jump to the end, like when you're getting into like the trills? So maybe start from the on the last page there. You could play it on it. Doesn't you play it on your cornet if you're going to play this on your cornet.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, a bad place to make you jump in there. You got it. All right, let's pause there for a second. All right, so a couple of things like, you know, like something I work on a lot with my students, especially like college students, are like some of the really basic, boring fundamentals that that I get some funny looks at. But like how like you hold your instrument is important. You want to do this for the rest of your life, right?
Yeah.
Right. This is something like you want to do, and so like funny things like posture and how you're holding your horn that don't feel great. Like I'm over 40 now. Things are starting to fall apart. My wrist all of a sudden hurts, my neck hurts, all these kind of things, you know, and like, so I try to implore to younger students now, it's like, be careful how you hold your instrument and how you're approaching things to be like as efficient as possible. This is your job now. Like, you know how to play the instrument. Now you're learning the efficiency. Like, how can I get the best results with like the least amount of work, right? So like how your valves are played, it's like you got all these technical things like da, 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 da. But when I'm watching your valves, I have a nice clear shot. Man, your fingers are like flying all over the place, right? And it's just like, in reality, it looks impressive from back here. And so I always put myself back in my younger self, and I think like, all right, I've got this really technical passage I'm gonna nail, and everyone out there is gonna like be super impressed because I'm gonna play all these fast notes, and I'm gonna make it look like I'm working really hard, right? And I'm gonna like, and like inevitably I would like fall over myself trying to do that.
Yeah.
And I always remember, like we talked about Lars, I always remember like when I first joined the territorial band, Lars Youngholm is like, you know, one of the best cornet players I had around me. Is sound, constant, everything else. But like one thing I always appreciate about Lars is like he's so like even keeled. Yeah. And often like he would you know, I'd like just sit in the corner doing a really nice slow long tone warm up and doing some things. And then when we get in band, like he's just like kind of sitting back, not with his legs crossed, but almost like with that idea, and just like, not that he's taking that rehearsal as seriously as anybody in the room, but like everything is so efficient, almost just looks easy, right? It's just like, because it's his job. That's just what you do, right? You get up and you do your job and you go about your business, right? So I always kind of like wanted that. When I was younger, I called that like old man technique. This kind of like the technique that it's like, I'm not proving to anything to anybody anymore. Like, I'm a professional player now. I have to be able to do this. And everyone's expecting me to be able to do that. And I do, because it's my job to do it. I can sit back and look easy doing it. So like one of those things is like, just like kind of releasing that kind of like mentality. Not to say that you do, but I did. I know when I was younger. And just like keep those fingers on the valves. You'll have a little bit more like dexterity, because it's just more efficient. It's just like the nature of it. So like in your fundamental practice time, like that's something when you're doing your Clark studies, whatever else, like hold your horn really correctly, almost annoyingly so that it's getting back into that habit of like correct posture, because it will add years to your playing life. You know, everything else, like your fingers, and you won't have to go to the chiropractor as much in the carpal tunnel. It's gonna add some time. Now, talk to me about the trill. Oh man, this one has got these 2 G to A trills. What are you gonna do? How do you approach that?
Well, it's tough. This is like one of the worst trills, but I mean, I use third valve, go from open to third, and I try to. I mean, I try to stay in the same spot, like stay,
right.
If I'm aiming just for G, I try and just stay on that same spot if I can, because I realize like once I mean, sometimes I'll get to the point in a trill where like I feel like I'm getting it efficiently.
Right.
And it comes a lot easier when I'm kind of just focused on the G.
Right.
But I'll lose sight of that a lot, and
it's hard, right? And this is the hardest. That is just the nastiest trill. You get up there, like all like the, you know, everything is closer together, so you're going kind of getting all around. Have you ever tried lip trills on that?
Yeah, I've been trying to do it on the second trill, like the 2 whole notes. One, and like sometimes it'll kind of start off going to B flat, but then it'll kind of settle going to A.
So do you do it on open or 1 and 2?
Open.
Have you ever tried it 1 and 2?
Actually, I haven't.
So I mean, if you think like, you can kind of like 1 and 2, I find for me works better, because you're right, like the open can kind of pop, because really technically it's the next partial up is the B flat.
Yeah.
You're just playing like a really flat B flat and hoping the A comes out. There's a trade-off, because with the 1 and 2, it's kind of like a little bit of a flat G, but that's a sharp note anyway. So it might actually kind of like try it 1 and 2. How do you practice lip trills, tongue trills, really? What do you do to practice them?
I mean, really, I'll just take it slow. I'll just kind of do it at different like increments, like quarter notes, I mean, 1/8 notes, not half notes, like 16th notes, and so forth, and then just kind of making it, I don't know, like a Richard Marshall-esque, how he can just go back and forth, however, but and just try at different speeds and see which fingerings work.
Right. Yeah, I mean, coming up with a good methodical way to do it. Like I've got like just like a little simple 1-page thing that I've worked on to try to get like the lip trills better. And I must admit, and you probably maybe noticed when I played that, like once I get the trill going, if I cheat a little bit, and it's not cheating, it's trying to get the right sound, I'll actually like just shake a little bit, and I try not to do it too much so that from back there it doesn't look like it's more. Yeah. But if I can just get it going and put like a little wiggle on it, I can get that. Yeah. So anyway, you know, as you're going on this, like there's some things to kind of work on. Note lengths, the phrasing stuff in the middle to like make it as lyrical as possible. See if you can get a lip trill going on that. It's just, I found it kind of works a little bit easier on that once you learn to do it. Anyway, but I mean, it sounds really good. I know we're running out of time. We should get to some questions. But yeah, it sounds really great, Matthew. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of the work you've been doing.
Great playing, Matthew.
Really great. Yeah, thanks, Matthew.
All
right.
I think we should probably get to questions. I want to just reiterate what the idea. Just want to the takeaway here is the American cornet sound. We don't have to manufacture something that is not natural to us. We can go for a lyrical, beautiful cornet sound with an American approach. I also, for me, the takeaway is the difference between solo cornet playing and section cornet playing, which I think is excellent, and Matthew demonstrating the two different approaches as a soloist. But also, I don't want to forget, as we move away from it, the idea of the difference between solo playing and section playing. Do we have any questions out there? I really don't know how to know if people are asking questions, so just get out there and ask your questions.
Anthony, you got a question?
I do, yes. I just wanted to first say good job to Matthew Byrne. That was really excellent. It was good to listen to that, so thank you for that. I was wondering, you talked a little bit earlier about vibrato.
Uh-huh.
You know, in our lesson, we talked a little bit about vibrato, but I was wondering if you could maybe go a little bit more in depth on that subject and talk about, my question specifically is, do you consciously think about vibrato whenever you're playing? And do you practice it in your practice sessions, and how do you go about practicing it? That's my question.
Right. Yeah. Me personally, with students, I don't really teach vibrato because I think the essence of vibrato kind of needs to be a natural thing. Kind of like I take much more a singing approach than I do like a string player approach, I must admit, on vibrato, where I want it to be natural. So for me, like, I don't think about adding vibrato. I have to think about taking away vibrato. I have to be careful to not use vibrato too much, because it's like, I think growing up as a cornet as my primary stylistic approach, vibrato is something, that has seeped into other things. So sometimes when I'm playing like a piccolo trumpet thing in particular, I'll get to a note and add like a little stanky vibrato on it, and everybody's going, that sounded weird. And it's just like, so I have to like practice. So what I'll do often in my practice time is like try to remove the vibrato completely, so that when I'm adding it back in, it's an artistic choice. Again to this like kind of a cornet playing thing, I think it's a danger to try to do this like every note I'm playing, I'm going to add as much vibrato as possible, like for the section. There's different approaches to this. I know like it is taught as a way for a section to broaden like what sounds in tune. If everybody's using vibrato all the time, it kind of like, so there's some truth to that too, but maybe as a soloist is what I'm talking about. I try to not add vibrato to anything slower than like a half note. And then on the longer notes, to try to just like start it like as straight and as full and rich of a sound as I can, and then color it at the end. Because sometimes if we add the vibrato too soon, it takes away from like the color of the note. And, so I think vibrato needs to be natural. It needs to be delicate. It needs to be like a musical addition. It needs to be, something, an ornament, not necessarily like a given. So in that respect, like taking it from a singer's perspective, when you listen to singers, every one of them have kind of a different style of vibrato, what works for them, as opposed to some other things.
Would you?
So I don't know if that
agree that vibrato is maybe the first thing that people try to figure out, and I think that might be probably a misconception about cornet playing.
Yes.
Is that you've got to, if you're going to play cornet, you've got to you add all this vibrato.
Right. Yeah, I think so. I think that is a misconception. It's like playing cornet means a lot of vibrato, because often what I hear, and this comes down to like a performance practice thing, people who are new to cornet, a lot of what they're listening to are really old school cornet playing from like the 1940s, 1950s, and maybe some different like sound concepts back then. So you kind of, sometimes you get almost what sounds like, and not to be offensive, but like an old man vibrato, where it's like almost kind of wah, 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 like this manufactured thing, which I think isn't necessarily natural. I think it's added because they feel like, well, I'm playing cornet, so I have to add vibrato now. And I just don't agree with that. I think the sound concept is different, it's separate from the vibrato.
Yeah, interesting. Any other questions out there?
Stefan. Hey, Stefan.
Hey. So Jeff, so here's a question about like, about your experience. So how many years have you been doing all this in Asbury?
In Asbury?
Yes.
Well, I spent 4 years there, like in my undergrad. I've been teaching trumpet at Asbury for 5 years now. So that's how long I've been teaching trumpet there. I was kind of like, as a college trumpet teacher, I hit a milestone, but I just had my two first like guys graduate that I started like as a freshman. So that was kind of like, exciting for me to see my first group of guys from the very beginning all the way through, that. So yeah, I've been there about 5 years.
Excellent.
Thank you, Steph. Any other questions out there? All right. Well, it looks like some of our boys just woke up. There, Anthony and Matthew. Just kind of rolled out here. And anyway, it's a very interesting topic. I think it's probably time for us to depart. There's a few things going on later in the day that you're going to want to make sure that you attend and bring your friends with you. Nick, I think you should come up with a prize as people that bring the most people, like a old Sunday school technique.
I love it. I think Steph Hall's winning at the moment.
Yeah. But at 1 p.m. Eastern, you've got John Lamb. He's going to be talking about brass bands, and what a great guy and such a knowledgeable man who thinks through everything and approaches everything in such a beautiful way. So you're going to want to make sure that you go experience John Lamb. And then at 3 p.m., what a treat to have the International Staff Songster leader with us, Dorothy Nanskaville. I hope I pronounced that last name correctly. And she'll be with us at 3 p.m. Eastern. And again, she is an absolute expert. And so you're going to want to bring a notepad, make sure you're writing down things, and bring your friends along to that as well. Jeff, I'm as proud as I could possibly be to have you as a brother and to watch you grow and all the way up to becoming a doctor of trumpet, which I think is just fantastic. If you're looking for a good college, I think if you're a trumpet player, Asbury would be a great option and a great Christian school where you can experience a great teaching and with Jeff, but also in a very strong Christian man who's going to look after you in that regard too, and can at Asbury, which is excellent. So thank you so much, Jeff. Appreciate you.